Okay, everybody, let's get started. First of all, thank you for joining me. I'm excited about this talk tonight. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Jeannette Painovich. I have been practicing traditional Chinese medicine for about 21 years, which means I primarily use acupuncture and Chinese medicine to treat people's issues. But I also, in the last 5 years, have started doing a lot of nutritional consultations. So you may ask yourself, well, why am I doing a talk on dementia and Alzheimer's disease? Well, unfortunately, I lost my mom almost 2 years ago to Alzheimer's. And so since her diagnosis, I have taken a deep dive into trying to figure out what I could do to help her, what I could do to help others. And that is why I'm here today. So not only have I lost her, I've lost a couple other family members to this disease, and I have a couple other family members who are now suffering. So I am here to impart all of my knowledge on you, and hopefully you can take some good points from this and start to, change those habits in your life that you want to do for yourself. All right, so let's get started. So a lot of people are often confused on the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Well, dementia is really not a specific disease. It's kind of like a group of symptoms, right? And these symptoms can impact a person's ability to perform everyday activities independently. The symptoms that you normally will see, of course, is a decline in memory, but your thinking skills can change, and your judgment reasoning skills can become reduced as well. You may not be able to focus as well. And then you can also have changes in your ability to communicate. So these are kind of the broad umbrella that describe what dementia is. Alzheimer's disease is just a progression of a certain type of dementia. There's lots of dementias out there. I'm focusing just on Alzheimer's disease. And because Alzheimer's disease is definitely the most common dementia among older adults, and it's typically associated with abnormal buildups of proteins in the brain known as amyloid plaques and tau tangles. And these tangles and plaques will lead to a loss of connection among nerve cells, which then lead to the issues in memory, in communication, and all those things we talked about previously. But let's talk a little bit about the astounding facts surrounding dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So in the past 20 years, deaths from ailments such as heart disease, stroke, HIV, and cancers, all those things that we've heard about for years, those deaths have actually reduced dramatically because we've found ways to treat them. But over that same time period, deaths related to Alzheimer's disease has increased by 89%, right? So that's almost 90%. Alzheimer's disease will strike an estimated 1 in 9 Americans age 65 and older, and that's a lot. And then 1 in 3 seniors right now dies with some form of dementia or Alzheimer's. Now, one thing that I can tell you, one risk factor that we can't change, right, is sticking your head in the sand. This will not prevent dementia or Alzheimer's disease. And I have to say, my mom was in denial for a long time and didn't want to talk about it. And unfortunately, that really impacted the amount of things that I could do for her when I was finally found out how to try and treat this horrible disease. Research actually demonstrates that over 50% of the population that recognize they have changes in cognition never talk to a doctor about it. All right, again, we want to stick our head in the sand and pretend it's not there, but that's not a good plan. Brain changes associated with dementia and Alzheimer's actually begin decades before the onset of the symptoms that make you concerned, right? Decades before, okay? Which means we need to then intervene decades before. And if people actually sought help and intervened at an earlier stage, preventing and even reversing these cognitive changes is possible and much easier. So what are the current answers for dementia and Alzheimer's from Western medicine? Well, unfortunately, not a whole heck of a lot. Despite billions and billions of dollars that have been spent by the government, pharmaceutical companies and biotech wizards that have tried to find an answer have failed almost 100%, right? Basically, they say 99.6, but basically nothing's working. In fact, the Alzheimer's Association has stated that the currently approved Alzheimer's medications are ineffective. And you know that people don't like to say that. So these medications are ineffective in stopping or slowing the course of the disease. And even worse is a recent study has shown actually taking these medications that they do often give with these diagnoses, sometimes it can actually increase the progression of your cognitive decline. All right. So we need to find other answers because there are no answers from a Western medical standpoint. There are several different stages of cognitive decline. All right. The first one is called subjective cognitive impairment. Right. This is when we notice that some of the issues with our memory or sharpness are decreased. Right. We've all been there. If you're, in your 40s and 50s or older, we're like, oh my gosh, my memory is just not as good. I can't find that word recall. That's what's called subjective cognitive impairment. Right. But if you actually go and get a test to look at your neurocognitive abilities, they'll all come back normal. All right. And this phase can last up to a decade and sometimes never get worse, right? But what happens next is that we go into something called mild cognitive impairment. This is what follows our subjective feeling. And this is when we actually go get those tests done, and they are showing that we are having some issues with our memory, our organization skills, speaking, calculating, those things that we do on a daily basis. But typically, even with MCI, typically we can still do our daily functions and sometimes even work. But every year, 5 to 10% of those people who have these changes will convert into Alzheimer's disease. All right, so we need to intervene. And then Alzheimer's dementia, right? This is when we experience a whole global cognitive decline, right? You can't do things like read, write, speak. It's hard to keep a conversation going. And towards the end, people can't even care for themselves. So they have to have help with their grooming and their bathing and all those kinds of things. All right. And they can also get, very suspicious and oftentimes very angry. So those are the stages of cognitive decline. But what's really going on inside the brain of someone who has dementia or Alzheimer's? Well, as I mentioned before, there's an accumulation of a protein fragment called beta amyloid that causes a buildup of plaques outside the neurons. So neurons are the cells in our brain. So those are the things that communicate with each other, that help us do all of our daily activities, our memories, all the things that we do to survive, right? So those are called neurons. So we get these plaques built up in between the neurons, but we also get an accumulation of an abnormal protein called tau. And so we have named these tau tangles, and these occur inside your neuron. So you have plaques going on outside, you have tangles going on inside, and so that whole area really gets bogged down, right? And together, these are the things, like I said, that interfere with our brain's normal activity. So this is what it looks like. So in a normal brain, you have this space in between your neurons, right? And this space is clear. It is able to send signals from one neuron to the next. You've got these little axons that go out to each other. And it's like a good game of telephone. This sends a signal to this, tells a story to this, and things work great. When you start to get buildups, what happens is that you get this plaque that sits in between this space in between the neurons. And so these signals get blocked. It's like hitting a roadblock, when you're on the freeway. So they can't get signals in between neurons, but they also can't even function normally within the own cells. So you've got signals inside your cell, you've got signals that go between cells. Both those areas get damaged, tangled, plaque builds up, and then you can no longer function normally. But the question is, why do these plaques and tangles form in the first place, right? So what I want you to take away tonight is that the development of Alzheimer's and dementia is a protective response in the brain from assaults that come from 4 major factors in the body. These factors include chronic inflammation, and we'll talk about these all in detail soon, all right? If you're insulin resistance, if those blood sugar numbers, those A1C numbers are creeping up, or if you have frank diabetes where you're already on medication, that makes you at great risk for getting these plaques and tangles. Trophic withdrawal, that means that we have a decrease in cell support. So things, different molecules that help our neurons work well, hormones, nutrients. Okay, all those things as they deplete, it causes problems for our brain. And then toxins is the last thing that oftentimes will cause these to form, right? And these are things like toxic heavy metals, which are in our foods, in the air we breathe. Things like viruses, different viruses like herpes simplex 1 makes us more susceptible, different bacteria, and mold. Mold can be a very big factor in causing these plaques and tangles. But this is what's happening. So I want you to take a look at this. So we have this sensor, right? A lot of these sensors that a little bit of it sits in the inside of the cell and some of it sits outside the cell, right? And so this job of this periscope reminds me of submarine periscope. It's out here and it's sensing. And if it senses that, hey, this person's pretty healthy, there's not much inflammation, their blood sugar levels are low, there's not too much stress, they basically will just, it will cut itself, it's called cleaving. It cleaves itself in half because it doesn't need a lot of help to kind of sop up those toxins that might be circulating around. And so their job is to attach to these different toxins, both inside and outside of the cell. And then they attach to them and then they take them out. They take it out through, you know, your urine, your feces, that type of thing. But if this periscope gets signals downstream that there's lots of issues, you're chronically inflamed, you're really stressed out, you're not eating healthy, then it starts to cut itself in multiple pieces because it thinks it needs to bring lots of soldiers to this war in order to fight all of the toxins, all of the inflammation that's going on. The problem is that the body can't rid itself of all of these different pieces of our little sensor here. And so when it thinks it's helping itself out, it's actually not, because these start to then bind, get stuck inside, again, in between the neurons and stuck inside the cell, and then they start to plaque together. All right, so we don't want those happening. All right, we don't want these to get cut into many pieces. We just want 2 pieces that sop up a little bit of the stuff that we get in on a daily basis and then take it, excrete it out of the body. So I want you guys to remember that this sensor, right, it's looking for problems downstream to protect your brain upstream. So this is like, you know, say a dam forms in a river, right? The dam forms because it's got a lot of broken twigs, a lot of pollutants, a lot of garbage, and then it, you know, starts to go downstream. And then when things narrow out where the space isn't so big, it starts to get stuck. And then you've got this big dam that accumulates. Well, you can dynamite that dam out, right? But what happens if you don't fix your body downstream, if you don't clean up your diet, if you don't reduce your stress and your inflammation, guess what? These signals are still going to get the same signals. You're still going to get the same, you know, stick, limb, branch, pollutants, garbage built up, and it will build up again. And that is exactly why pharmaceuticals don't work, because the pharmaceuticals are trying to target these different plaques inside and outside the cell. So you can get rid of them. You can try and get rid of them, but the problem is you're still getting signals downstream saying, hey, I need help. I need help. I've got all these enemies around. They're trying to kill me. And so I need to bring in all these soldiers, right? So if you don't clean it up downstream, it is too late upstream to take care of the dam. All right, so I hope that makes sense, that this is all a protective mechanism in your brain because it thinks it has things that are trying to harm it. Things like inflammation and blood sugars. Those all make cells not work well. And so our body, because it's so good at taking care of itself, will do everything it can to help us because it thinks it's helping us. In reality, it's hurting us. All right, so we got to take care of stuff before it gets all bogged down. Now, there is a genetic factor involved. All right, there's a gene variant called ApoE4 that increases the risk of developing dementia. Now, if you have one inherited ApoE4 gene from one of your parents, it will increase your risk of developing these diseases by about 3%. If you have a gene from both parents, then this is going to increase your risk 50 to 90%. And there is a blood test that you can get that will tell you if you have either of these genes. But what I want you guys to know is that because you have a genetic predisposition does not by any stretch of the imagination mean that you will get it. And this is because 90% of our gene modulators, meaning what turns these bad genes on or off, comes from something called epigenetics. And this epi means outside of our gene pool, right? So this is everything we do to ourselves. Are we drinking too much? Are we eating bad foods? Are we stressed out? Are we smoking? All the things that we choose to do to ourselves are going to either turn on the bad cell or the bad genes or turn it off. All right. So again, 90% of this is up to you. You know, how good do you want to treat your body? And do you want to keep these genetic factors turned off? So then what do we do to prevent or stop dementia? Well, fortunately, there is a physician by the name of Dr. Dale Bredesen, and his career has been to find that one answer, right? That one pharmaceutical, that one gene, that one molecule that we can create that is going to stop the buildup in the brain. And of course, lo and behold, what he found, you know, after doing his life's work is that it's not just one factor. What he found, and this was only because a mistake happened in his lab, but what they found is that there are actually 36 different factors that can contribute to the development of these problems. All right, 36 different factors. And when you combine these different factors, they can create different types of dementia. And again, we'll talk about that shortly. These different types of dementia then warrant different types of treatment approaches, right? And so you kind of want to know, well, am I more inflamed? Do I have these deficiencies and that type of thing? That is what he figured out and has actually now put in place all these different supplements and lifestyle modifications that if you take these and do these things, you can actually stop the progression and even sometimes reverse the disease if you have it. And what Dr. Bredesen said, right, is basically what my medicine has proclaimed for thousands of years, right? The only way to truly treat dementia or Alzheimer's, or any disease for that matter, is to take a personalized, holistic approach to both understand and treat each individual's underlying factors that are driving the buildup of these plaques and tangles. So he came up with 6 subtypes. The first is inflammatory, atrophic, glycotoxic, toxin, vascular, traumatic. We're going to talk about all of these in a little bit more detail. So let's talk about inflammatory factors, right? So these are the root causes of chronic inflammation, and there's a bunch of them. Okay, so if you're on medications, oftentimes it will cause chronic inflammation in the body. If you don't sleep well, if you're stressed out, if again, your blood sugars aren't good, which then come from poor nutrition, hormone imbalances or biochemical imbalances will cause inflammation, as will a sedentary lifestyle, right? We need to move. Now, these factors are the lighter blue boxes: obesity, infections, anxiety, and depression. This is kind of like a two-way relationship. So if you have these, it will cause chronic inflammation. But if you have chronic inflammation from all these other factors, it can also lead to these things, right? So it can make you depressed or anxious, it can make you obese, and it will make you more susceptible to infections. But all of these factors, one or a combination of more than one, will cause oftentimes chronic inflammation in your body. Type 2 is atrophic. So that's what I talked about, that you don't have enough of certain nutrients and hormones and chemicals in the body. So if your vitamin D or B levels are low, it can cause problems. If your hormones are low, and I'm not going to get into deep dive about hormones because it's a hot topic, but I can tell you that women are twice as likely to get diagnosed with dementia and Alzheimer's. And the main thing, right, that how we differ from men is that we have estrogen, a lot more estrogen than they do. And as we go through menopause, and this is when a lot of women start to feel the memory issue, you know, it can cause problems. And again, the whole hormone replacement therapy, again, that's something that you need to talk to with your provider and whoever it is that, you know, you deal with that to see if something that you might want to do. Again, I'm not going to discuss it, too big of a topic, but it can create problems if they're too low. Again, if you're low on zinc, it can be a problem. Sleep. Everyone talks about sleep and how important it is. The reason that sleep is so important is because during the day, your brain is so busy keeping you alive and making you able to do your, you know, your normal daily activities that it doesn't have any time to detoxify itself, except for when you sleep. that is when the brain actually has enough downtime for all those little sensors to go pick up those toxins and then flush them out of the body. So if you're not sleeping properly, that is the problem, is that you don't give your body time to get rid of all the toxic buildup, right? And so the body's good at trying to do that, but you have to give it enough time. And then cholesterol. I am probably the only person you've heard in a long time that's going to tell you that if your cholesterol is too low, it is not good. All right. And the reason being is that these low levels of cholesterol are actually associated with more Alzheimer's and dementia. And the reason being is because specifically the LDL part of your cholesterol, which everyone thinks is the bad guy, that is actually the essential fuel for neurons, because these neurons aren't able to generate their own fuel and they need the LDL to get it to them. So if you are on this cholesterol medication and your LDLs are really low, then you don't have as much ability to get the fuel to your brain cells as you need. All right. Now, some LDL can be bad for you, but LDL comes in different sizes, right? So some can be small and dense and some can be big and fluffy. The big and fluffy guys are what we want, and it's what most people have. But the only way you know what type of LDL you have is to get a test that is not done in a regular doctor's office. All right. So there are tests out there that will tell you your LDL size. And if it's low and or the small dense one, you've got a lot of them or they're oxidized, then yeah, maybe we need to medicate. But what I want you to know right now is do not go on cholesterol medication until you have a really clear picture of what those LDLs actually look like. All right. Because they can be beneficial, very beneficial for us. So let's just remember that what I'm talking about is not found on a standardized cholesterol test. Okay. But there are ways to get that tested, to look at the size. All right. So glycotoxic, right? If you have high insulin or if your blood sugars are high, if the doctor's saying, hey, you're borderline, we're creeping up. If you're borderline, it's already too high, right? I think normal A1C range, they want you below 5.7, but really to really prevent those plaques or to prevent that risk factor for plaquing, it's better to be at 5.2 on those A1C tests that you get from your doctor. All right. Diabetes is such a huge risk factor for Alzheimer's that experts in the field actually call it type 3 Alzheimer's, because it is definitely the #1 risk for suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's. So if you have blood sugar problems, get them under control. And I can tell you, I've had several patients who, when they change their diet, we have, and their A1Cs can be high, like 10, 11, that type of thing, and on, lots of medication. If they change their diet and start to do what they need to do, they can get those blood sugars normalized. They can get off their medication. Do not do this on your own. Certainly do it with a medical advisor, because you want to make sure you're safe, but it can be done. Okay. Don't think it can't. I've seen it. I've done it with people. It can be done. And then toxic. All right. There are lots of things that can cause our brain to think we're under attack. Things like mold, metals like mercury, amalgams from the dental work. If you have surgical implants, it can sometimes leach into the body. Again, certain viruses like herpes simplex 1, if you have cold sores, that can make you a little more susceptible, different bacterias, and then food toxins. Quick talk about mold. My mother-in-law has dementia, and we did all of the bredesen testing, and she came back as highly probable for a toxin in her body. Sure enough, I did a mold test on her, and she has basically every mold known to man in her body. And so then we got the house evaluated, and there's mold in the house. And so, at this point, we're trying to rid the mold out of her body. They've got to get, all the sources of mold removed from the home. And hopefully when that happens, right, it will clear up her thinking, right? Let's talk a little bit about food toxins. And I'm telling you guys, these are so, so important. And so there's something called Roundup, which is an herbicide that is used on 100 food crops. So that's basically any food, any fruit and vegetable, that type of thing, anything that comes from the ground is treated with this, because farmers and growers can have a bigger crop, right? And a healthier crop from, different bugs and stuff. So they use it all the time. And so when people say, should I eat organic? You absolutely should eat organic, and you want to make sure the products are not genetically modified. So it's non-GMO. It is of the utmost importance that you do this. All right. Now, the food industry claims that this glyphosate doesn't affect the particular pathway in our body and that it's not harmful to humans. But in reality, it does interfere with our gut bacteria, right? Because if this is an herbicide, right, it's trying to kill different parasites and bacteria from our plants. You know darn well it's probably going to kill bacteria that are helpful for you inside your gut, right? And so it actually does, this Roundup actually does target your beneficial bacteria, but of course does nothing to the pathogenic bacteria that we don't want, you know, building up in your body. Now let's take a look at this graph. So as you can see here, Roundup started to get put on our food products at about 1990. And you can see that the amount of Roundup used has increased drastically over the last, 30 years. Interestingly enough, if you look at the deaths from dementia and Alzheimer's, it has gone up drastically, and it almost mirrors the increase in glyphosate use. All right. Maybe this can be a coincidence, but I don't think so. I think it's because our gut bacteria, as you will see in a minute, is so important for our overall health and our brain health that when that goes bad, we all go bad. And so again, to me, if you're, eating foods that are full of this Roundup and this glyphosate, you are doing yourself a huge disservice. All right. Organic, non-GMO, do it. So type 5 is vascular. And basically, if you have things such as heart disease and strokes, that type of thing, that means that you've got plaque in your arteries. And typically this plaquing will also happen in your brain. All right. So if you have heart disease and stroke, you definitely want to, get on the bandwagon and really start reducing all of these risk factors. Okay. So what do we do to prevent or reverse dementia, right? This isn't rocket science. I think you're not going to be surprised. You need to eat real food, right? So we need to stop eating boxed food or processed food, and we need to eat what Mother Nature provides. You need to regulate that insulin sensitivity, which means you need to get your blood sugars down. How do we do that? Through eating real foods and doing something called intermittent fasting that we'll talk about, because intermittent fasting is a great way to reduce your blood sugar levels. And you need to stop the sugar. I, jokingly say, but it's really not a joke, sugar is the devil. Sugar is an atomic bomb to your gut bacteria. It will mess up your brain cells. It does so many bad things. All right. And again, sugar, right? It's not present in real foods. When you're eating vegetables primarily, they're not full of sugar. Fruits are full of a little bit of sugar, but there's fiber to counterbalance that. So stop the sugar, people. And we got to get our gut health at its top level, right? We do this with real food, right? We eat healthfully, and then we supplement with pre and probiotics when we need to. Again, we'll talk about that shortly. And other things. We need to exercise. We need to get sleep, like we talked about, because that is when our brain detoxes. And we need the correct supplementation. There are so many people on all of these supplements, right? I'm not sure if they're needed. And until you do some testing, you really don't know. I think most people need vitamin D on a daily basis, and for sure omega-3 fish oils. Those are the two things that I think people need. Other than that, we really need to do some testing. I'd rather you go out and spend more money on healthy food than you do on the hundreds of dollars you may be spending in supplementation every month. All right. You need to detox. How do you do that? Well, by eating the right foods, but also by using an infrared sauna. Some of you may know that I put one in my office, and the reason I did for people to use is because it has so many great health benefits. And one of the most important one is it's one of the only things that can detoxify the heavy metals out of your tissue, all right, out of those cells. It's great. You want to do brain training, right? Learn a language, start playing a new instrument. You want to challenge your brain. There's a program called Brain HQ that I love that you can get like a year's membership for. It's not very expensive. That makes you do computer games that challenge your brain. And then of course, you know, I'm putting acupuncture and Chinese herbs in. You probably think that's because I'm biased, but no, there are plenty of research articles out there to actually show all the positive benefits of using these in the treatment against dementia and Alzheimer's. All right, but I want to focus on the top four because really, as soon as you start eating healthfully, 80% of the battle is won. 80–90% of the battle, and not only this, but any chronic disease is based on the foods that you eat. All right, so we're going to focus on these four things. So who gets Alzheimer's? According to research, who gets Alzheimer's according to what they eat? Well, people who fill their plates with simple carbohydrates have 4 times the risk of developing mild cognitive decline, right? Which is that step right before Alzheimer's and dementia. But if you're actually eating healthy fats, and we'll talk about what these are, you're actually 42% less likely to experience that MCI, right? That mild cognitive decline. That's because the brain likes fats as fuels, but they got to be healthy, all right? Also, if you have an intake of healthy sources of protein, that will reduce your risk by about 20%, all right? And again, we'll talk about what healthy sources mean in just a minute. What are simple carbs? In case you don't know, they are everything that we love, right? Our candies, our cookies, our potatoes, our sodas. And I want you to know that if you think going from a regular soda down to a diet soda is better for you, it is not. There has been plenty of research to show that when you drink diet soda, it is worse for you. Again, it's another atomic bomb for your gut bacteria. Please stay away from sodas. Find an alternative. Find a nice unsweetened tea, something that you like, all right? Stay away from all the sugary stuff. And fruit juices, because they come from fruit, doesn't make them healthy. When you take a fruit and you squeeze it and make it into a juice, all you're drinking is sugar, all right? You've taken all the fiber, all the good stuff out, so you don't want a juice, all right? Because it's then all sugar. All right, so what do we eat? Well, we eat what Mother Nature provides. We want to focus on vegetables. Our diet should be focused around vegetables, lots of different colors, because they're high in, you know, vitamins, minerals, and fiber. Fiber is so important because it's what feeds our good bacteria, right? We want those healthy natural fats. And what does that look like? Well, this is what healthy natural fats look like. Those are your nuts and your seeds. They're the oils that actually come from naturally fat products, right? So your coconut oils and your avocado and your olive oils, right? Those are foods high in fat. Therefore, using them to cook with is your best alternative. There are a few others out there that you can use, but these are the best alternatives, and specifically coconut and avocado, because they have a higher heat point. They won't break down when you heat up these oils. This is what you want to focus on, all right? If an oil is made from something that's not usually an oil, like corn, right? Soybean oil, those aren't naturally fat. Therefore, if they turn them into a fat, it's because they've processed it. And that processing is really, really bad for your body. All right. So of course, avocados are good. Egg yolks. I know everyone thinks, oh, that increases my cholesterol. It doesn't. Usually what increases cholesterol are your carbohydrates, believe it or not. Meat fat is okay. Your dark chocolate. If you need a sweet treat, guys, go for the cacao that's 73% or higher. That is actually okay for you. I wouldn't say a whole bar a night, but you know, a little, you know, piece nightly is not a bad thing. And then your butters and your ghees, right? Dairy. People think dairy is bad, but actually dairy fat is actually fine for you. So if you have a butter, you just want to make sure it comes from grass-fed cows, or ghee, which is even the healthier type of butter. Those things are fine. All right. So these are the natural healthy fats that are actually good for you. Okay. So back to what we should eat. So when we talk about healthy proteins, that means that the animals that you eat are grass-fed and finished, meaning that they get to go out and they get to roam around and eat the grass that they naturally eat, or they're pastured, right? Same thing with the chickens and that type of thing. They get to go out and they get to peck and do the things that they normally do. Now, I'm going to tell you a disgusting statistic. So when farmers feed cows grains, right? They're not used to eating grains. And so what happens is their stomachs get all messed up because they don't like it, and then they stop eating. So in order to counteract that, the farmers give them Tums, so it calms down all their stomach upset. 50% of all the Tums that are eaten or used in the United States, 50% are given to cows to stop the belly aches they get from eating the wrong foods, all right? So not only that is going on, but then they fill them full of antibiotics because they crowd them in, right? Because they want, more cows, more profit. They give them antibiotics so that they don't catch what the next cow may have. So now you've got a ton of antacids, tons of antibiotics, and you've got all the stress hormones that are going on in these poor cows and other meat sources from being held in a constraint or a restrained place that they're not normally in. So all of these things, it gets into the meat. And so when you eat the meat of, these non-grass-fed or pastured meats, you're eating all that yourself. All right. Again, spend the extra money, pay for this. You're actually investing in your healthy older age. All right. So pay for this instead of nursing care later on. You want your fish to be wild caught. Fruits, you can have them, but in moderation. And usually it's best to have them in during their normal season. When they're normally grown, that's the best time to eat them. What do you want to avoid? Well, you want to avoid sugars, right? And again, no diet drinks. If you avoid wheat, you automatically avoid gluten. All right. So gluten are just 2 proteins found in wheats. So definitely want to keep those out of the diet because almost everyone's sensitive to them. Most people are sensitive to dairy because any dairy produced in the United States has a mutation in the protein, and that protein called A1 casein is usually problematic for most people's digestion. Some people are sensitive to eggs. If you are, obviously stay away from those. Again, the simple carbohydrates that we talked about, and then processed food, guys. If it's in a box, it's probably not good for you. All right, try and stick with things that are provided by Mother Nature and not boxed. So let's talk about when to eat. Well, there is something called intermittent fasting, and I know everyone's heard about it, and it's like all the craze. So many people use it for weight loss, but it actually has so many other health benefits, right? Dr. Bredesen recommends something called this KetoFlex 12-3. What he wants you to do is not eat any closer than 3 hours to bedtime. So say if you eat at 7, do not go to bed until 10. And he wants 12 hours in between dinner and breakfast. All right. This gets you in when you do that, when you take a longer period in between meals, it causes something called mild ketosis, which means you've now depleted all those sugar stores, right? All the glucose that's feeding the cells gets depleted. And so in order for your body to get extra energy, it starts to produce something called ketones. And this comes from your fats. So that's why intermittent fasting helps with weight loss, is because it activates your fat cells and then takes, from the fat cells, it turns that into the energy we need. So it helps get rid of that excess fat. Anyway, that's what you want to try and get into every day, is this mild state of ketosis, because the ketones are what feed the brain. The brain loves ketones. All right. Now, I actually think it's better to go a little bit longer. The research that I've looked at, really kind of 13 hours or more is a little bit better. But, Bredesen's done this a long time, and he says 12-3. So anyway, it's good, regardless of how you do it, it's good to get into a mild state of ketosis. And ongoing research is actually showing that when you do intermittent fast, it leads to longevity with a lower risk of that neuroinflammation, right? That inflammation we want out of our brains, right? And therefore it reduces dementia and Alzheimer's. More importantly, is fasting keeps our insulin and our blood sugars low, right? Not too low. You're not going to bottom out your glucose levels, but it keeps them at a very low, healthy level, which is what we want. And most importantly, fasting is one of the best ways to help our gut bacteria. All right. It is the best way to get our gut bacteria to work as best as they absolutely can. And why is this important? Well, our gut bacteria matters, right? I guarantee you, if you take care of them, make them the focus of what you eat and how you take care of yourself every day, they will take care of you. Okay, so this idea is simple, right? Our gut, which includes our cells as well as trillions of microbes, right, is in constant bidirectional communication with our brains. And so there's something called a vagus nerve. It's the biggest nerve we have, and it goes from our gut to our brain. And so remember that sensor that we always talked about? Again, it's always from this vagus nerve looking around, what's going on in the gut? Is it healthy? Is it taking care of itself? Do I need to protect my brain, or are we okay, right? That is constantly going on in the body. Now, I want you to realize we evolved from one single bacteria. That is what we evolved from. So if we evolved from a bacteria, that means that those bacteria are so important in who we are and how we function on a daily basis, all right? Okay, we have 100 times as many bacteria in our gut than we do cells in our body. So they are the powerhouse. They are what drives our health, all right? And then, research data provided to our brains from the microbiome will influence the neurotransmitters in our brain, right? The communication, how good it's doing. It regulates the neurons. Can they fire? Are they good? Are they sharp? And it even actually can shape the structure of the brain itself, right? So that gut-brain axis is important. Those bacteria can literally mold our brain and how well it works. The other reason that our gut bacteria is so important is because they produce something called short chain fatty acids, all right? And these short chain fatty acids, these molecules have a variety of positive effects in our body, both in the gut and the brain. So if we're not producing short chain fatty acids, our brain's not working right. And the only way we produce these short chain fatty acids is through the interaction between our gut bacteria and fiber. So when the gut bacteria breaks down the fiber in our food, they create these short chain fatty acids. Fiber, where does it come from? Mostly vegetables, right? So that's why we want to have a vegetable forward type of diet, because the more fiber you have, the more good gut bacteria you have, the more short chain fatty acids we have, right? And that short chain fatty acid production, right, influence the levels of chemicals and neurotransmitters that protect our neurons. So they protect our brain, and they also help grow new neurons, right? Both of those are very important. All right, so probiotics. Again, kind of a subject of what are they and what do they do? So probiotics are naturally found in high concentrations in fermented foods. So things like kefir, yogurt, kimchi, sauerkraut, some cheeses, those types of things. Consuming a wide range of those, right? Just lots of different bacteria. If we have a large range of those in our diet, that will provide a multitude of health benefits. In fact, a recent study, a meta-analysis, which means it looked at all the research surrounding this in the Journal of Aging, they examined the existing research on probiotics on cognition and Alzheimer's disease and concluded that consuming probiotics was associated with a significant lowering of that inflammation, right? And improved our cognition. So again, we want to make sure that we have the right gut bacteria, which probiotics can provide, and we want to make sure that we are feeding them correctly with the food, also with prebiotics. So prebiotics are actually the food that feed our good gut bacteria, all right? So like I said, they're the food that feeds our microbes. More simplistically, these are components of our diet that reach into the gut microbiome undigested. And these undigested food sources provide the fuel for our gut bugs to grow, the good guys, and they benefit our health. Prebiotics are basically fibers and digestible fibers, but not all fiber can be called a prebiotic. So foods like garlic, onions, leeks, dandelion greens, those things are really particularly high in prebiotic fibers. But basically, if you eat a diverse generally healthy diet that's rich in plants, that's going to support, right? It's going to give your gut bacteria good sources of food, therefore they'll grow and will keep that balance where it wants to be, right? When you eat sugars, it feeds the bad guys. That's why we don't want to eat sugar, all right? So you eat healthy food to feed the good guys and keep the bad guys at bay. That's kind of the goal with everything we do. So what negatively impacts our gut bacteria? Antibiotics takes away the bad guys that can cause problems for you, but it also takes away all your good guys. Antifungals do the same thing. If you're on an antacid, we need to get you off that. Come see me, go see anybody that practices traditional Chinese medicine. We're great at getting you off the antacids and calming down that reflux. Pharmaceuticals can blow up your gut microbiome. Stress is a big bomb. Sugar, a big bomb. And processed food, a big bomb, right? So all of these can really mess us up, right? So try and do some stress management, stay away from the sugar for the 100th time. And again, if it's in a box, probably not good for you. So why do we exercise for our brain? Very quickly. So exercise actually produces a neuron supporting molecule called BDNF. I'm not going to go into the big name, but exercise is the best way and one of the only ways to improve that in our brains, right? So you need to get active. And it doesn't have to be like 60 minutes of walking. You can go do 15 minutes of, more high intensity training where you do something for maybe a minute and then you rest for a minute, and then you hit it again for a minute and rest for a minute. So, and also resistance training is very important for us as we grow older. Okay. Again, you need to exercise, you need to get moving, and it doesn't have to take all day. Carve out 15 or 20 minutes for you. It'll make all the difference in the world. So what does acupuncture do? Well, research has shown that it actually suppresses the formation of amyloid plaques. And why is this? No doubt in my mind, is because acupuncture is one of the best ways to reduce systemic inflammation. Okay, remember chronic inflammation being the biggest factor for causing those plaques and tangles? Acupuncture is one of the best things at calming down that inflammation in your body because it calms down your sympathetic nervous system. But it's also been proven to help your blood sugars regulate. It improves your gut microbiome. And again, I said it reduces stress and calms our nervous system, and it can also improve your blood pressure. So lots of good things that acupuncture can do. So that's just not me talking, that is the research that's out there. Remember, prevention starts now, right? Earlier is easier. Research at Johns Hopkins University tracked more than 12,000 people with an average age of 57, and they followed them for about 20 years. They found that adults with the highest levels of inflammatory markers in our body, and these are things that you can do with a regular blood test, you can check, when those inflammatory markers were high in their 40s and 50s, those same people were the ones who had a steeper rate of cognitive decline. All right, so it starts early. You may not feel the symptoms until your 60s and 70s, but all that plaquing and those tingles are starting in your 40s and 50s. So time to act is now. Dementia, right? It's a progressive disease that occurs over several decades. So intervene sooner rather than later, because once you are at that Alzheimer's disease level, it is tough to turn back what's already built up. It can happen sometimes, but it makes it a lot tougher, right? So preventing and or arresting the process now is the key, and the sooner you intervene, the better. So I know that I've talked a lot about things that you can, you should do, and now you're like, well, how do I start doing it? I know it's tough, so I'm going to give you some suggestions. Dr. Bredesen has a book out there called The End of Alzheimer's. He goes over everything I just talked about. It's a great book. It's a thick read, but if it's something that you're really interested in, I think you'll find it fascinating. From a nutritional intervention standpoint, and there's lots of good books out there, people. This is not the only one. I think the Plant Paradox does the best job of explaining why you want to keep your insulin levels low. It also talks about foods that you actually may not react well to, different plants that can be problematic in about 25% of the population. I think he just does a good job. There's the original Plant Paradox. That's a thick book for nerds like me who sit around and read nutrition books for on their for pleasure. But there's also one called Quick and Easy, which really highlights the bullet points, does a great job of kind of explaining it to you. Within that book, there are lists of foods to kind of stay away from and those that are safe to eat. He also has some recipes in there. I just think it's a good way to get started. But again, lots of books out there on eating healthfully and keeping your blood sugars low and all that stuff. If you want to do a big series of tests and you want to see where do I fall in that category of 5 different groups of people that are susceptible to Alzheimer's, Dr. Bredesen's website is apollohealth.com. If you go there, you'll find lots of great information on his website. Again, you can do testing. It's extensive. It's expensive, but again, you're to me, you're making an investment into your future health, so it's worth it. Once you get the test results, there are people on the website who you can go to that will help walk you through it. I have done the training, and my name's not up there just because that is, I'm focused more on treating other patients with different diseases, but I can help you through that. If that's something that you want, just contact me. On my website, I have up there a set of videos on intermittent fasting and healthy eating. So it's a set of 3. You can find those on my website at drpainovich.com, and I'll show you here in a minute what that looks like. Those videos, what I try and do is explain to you why intermittent fasting is so good for you, how to intermittent fast properly, as well as what foods to eat when you are eating, right? Because you won't want to just intermittent fast and then eat like crap, when you are eating. You really want to intermittent fast and then eat the right foods to keep your body healthy while you're eating, all right? I do offer individual nutrition sessions. If you want a more one-on-one version of my videos, you can contact me. We can set that up. But I do think the videos do a really good job of explaining everything. And once you get them, you can watch them over and over again. And it also comes with different links on, different recipes and lots of different stuff to help you out. All right. If you go to my website, and this is just a screenshot of my website right here, you'll see that it says intermittent fasting, and this is where you can purchase those videos if you so choose. All right, so that's there for you. And again, yes, this is hard, but it is doable. All right, I want you guys to know that becoming healthier may be hard, but dealing with dementia or Alzheimer's disease will be much harder, not only for you, but for your family, right? It's so stressful for family members to watch their loved ones go through this, to try and help them through it. And then financially, it can be quite a big burden, all right? So as John Kennedy said in his inaugural address, that time to repair the roof is when the sun is still shining, right? Don't get a new roof when you got all the holes that are already leaking. Take care of the roof now, it will take care of you, right? It'll keep you safe and protected. All right, guys. Thank you so much for attending. I hope this has been helpful. Please reach out to me via email. You can find my email contact on my website at drpainovich.com. You can email me with questions. And again, thanks for joining. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.